Greetings, friends of liberty. When we look to British history to see whether, as a nation, we are capable of assimilating other cultures and peoples into our own, one of the prime tests of our capacity for tolerant assimilation was found in our accepting a vast multitude of French Huguenots from 1572, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre onwards, all the way past Louis XIV's revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685. The edict had granted French Protestants a significant level of religious and civil tolerance, but not surprisingly, the Sunflower King, tyrant that he was, attempted to force the Hugues to accept Catholicism at the point of his sword by demolishing their churches, preventing their entry into professions, and stationing dragoons in their homes. But what else one may expect of a king who banned all the Jews from the French West Indies? What an uncivil rogue! And so many hundreds of thousands of Hugues, refusing to convert to popery, fled France and arrived on our shores. And where did they settle upon its arrival? Primarily in East London, some 25,000, largely in Spitalfields, but also in other towns such as Exeter, Plymouth, Dover, Rye, Colchester, Barnstaple, Norwich, and Canterbury. During the last couple decades of the 17th century and into the 18th, they flooded into England by the tens of thousands. At Canterbury and Norwich, they began their industrious weaving of silk and smithing of silver, and even settled among the bog trotters as well. Dublin, many becoming goldsmiths there quite successfully, as part of the Dublin Goldsmiths Company. The English people responded with alacrity and benevolent charity, with private donations gathered from Anglican churches, their assistance totaling over £90,000, and the English government responded too, creating a so-called civil list fund, which granted Huguenots £15,000 yearly for their community from 1696 to 1727. The government also passed a Naturalization Act for Huguenots in 1709. Of course, we did have a few utopian fanatics like Daniel Defoe, who thought to bring in as many Huguenots as possible and settle them on the marginal wastelands and swamplands of our farming communities. But such fantastical and unrealistic schemes came to nothing, as did the overwhelming majority of those who imagined sending the Huguenots to North America to start mulberry plantations for the growing of silk. I'm not aware of a single instance of those schemes which came to fruition. 'Tis understandable, however, that Defoe and others wanted to bring as many Huguenots as possible, since our population had been so greatly reduced after the Great Plague of 1666. Now, if we turn to the issue of the assimilation of immigrants in theory and practice in any country, but also quite specifically in North America, in your own 20th and 21st centuries in the United States of America, we encounter today Peter Salins' Assimilation American Style, in which he tries to grapple with and identify the essential reasons America has historically, for most of its history, been so successful in integrating tens of millions of immigrants from dozens of different countries. Salins, an author of Scarcity by Design, The Legacy of New York City's Housing Policies, and the ecology of housing destruction, here concentrates on the principles and practices he believes America needs to reaffirm if it is to stop the ethnic disintegration so often championed by those on both the left and right today. Salins begins by quoting a passage written already in 1856 describing America. If ever a nation was laid out on a truly cosmopolitan basis and gifted with an irresistible power of attraction, it is the American. To our shores they come in an unbroken stream from every direction. They meet here on the common ground of freedom and equality to renew their youth and to commingle at last into one grand brotherhood. And did America ever use those immigrants productively? It became the superpower it is because A, it was a free country with no welfare state, and B, let in tens of millions of immigrants who then bore tens of millions more children. In fact, if America, after its founding, had not had any immigration, its population today would be approximately an estimated 120 to 30 million people, or about 36% of what it is presently. Immigration into a free country incentivizes and entices the best, brightest, and most hardworking people from other countries to become American. Where did those immigrants settle? Overwhelmingly in the Northeast, the Midwest, and later the West Coast. Hardly anyone wanted to go to the slaveocracy of the South, or after the Civil War, a dirt-poor region with Jim Crow laws and a dislike of foreigners. But understandably, there have always been periods of nativism in which Americans were fearful that immigrants would degrade their general civilizational level. And given the fact that all ethnic groups, just like individuals, have their own individual strengths and weaknesses, this anxiety was understandable. So although the Irish were hardworking wherever they went and enlisted by the droves in the armed forces, they also took over city government, made it more corrupt, and gave many city jobs to fellow papists, and had rates of violence higher than Asian Americans, for example, and were more corrupt than German Americans. Similarly, with the Italians, you got some Sicilians, and with them, likely a propensity towards organized crime. Overall, however, historically, nativism has fluctuated in American life. An example being how quickly the Know-Nothing Party of the early 1850s disappeared by 1859, but on the other hand, how long the restrictions against Chinese immigrants remained embodied in the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which lasted 61 years until its repeal in 1943. Politically, as Salins notes, the large immigrant voting population in America meant that it was hard for restrictive laws to gain legislative traction. In addition, economically, it turns out that overall immigrants slightly reduce the unemployment rate for natives because they often do complementary jobs that natives refuse to do with the going wage, or create new businesses. So on the job side, it was natural that nativist resistance would subside. Salins at times becomes personal, describing the arrival of his own parents from Germany in 1938. We spoke German at home and ate German foods. My parents socialized with other German immigrants and joined German organizations. But not for 1 second during my German-speaking childhood did any of us, my parents, my sister, or I, doubt our Americanness. We took our Americanness for granted and were proud to be Americans. So when Carl Benjamin says you can't change your ethnicity, this is one of millions of disproofs. People can and do over time, just like people can learn a new language adding it to their old one. Then they know too. So how did America manage, unlike Canada or Eastern Europe, the Turks and Greeks in Cyprus, or the Protestants and Catholics in Ireland, How did it manage for much of its history to so successfully integrate tens of millions of new arrivals? With the famous melting pot, the term coined in 1908 by Israel Tsangwell in his eponymous play. As David, a character in the play, says, "There she lies, the great melting pot. Listen, can't you hear the roaring and the bubbling? There gapes her mouth, the harbor where 1,000 mammoth feeders come from the ends of the world to pour in their human freight. Ah, what a stirring and a seething! Celt and Latin, Slav and Teuton, Greek and Syrian, black and yellow." And so Salin's whole focus in this book is to understand what, for the most part, has made this melting pot work. What's responsible for its success? He identifies three primary processes. Immigrants, number one, had to accept English as the national language. Number two, were expected to take pride in their American identity and believe in America's liberal, democratic, and egalitarian principles. And number three, were expected to live by what is commonly referred to as the Protestant ethic, to be self-reliant, hardworking, and morally upright. Number four, by allowing all immigrants to become citizens after a brief residence and a painless apprenticeship, the United States offered formal membership in the American community. Let's follow Salins as he defends these one by one. Number one, regarding the speaking of English, he notes that German immigrants were more likely than others to want to retain the German language in their schools and communities, and even at times to mandate or want to mandate that laws be published in both German and English. These efforts failed, which he applauds. Number two, generally Salins believes that perhaps the most important part of the process in functioning to inculcate all of the above named principles was that most immigrant children were enrolled in free state-supported systems of public schools. The United States was one of the first nations to provide universal, compulsory, and free public education. Here, in essence, he argues, children through the public schools had to A, learn English, B, were imprinted with an American identity, and C, had to live by the Protestant ethic of hard work and responsibility. Number three, with respect to hard work and the Protestant ethic, Americans still, for whatever reason, work more per week than most other nations. At the same time, it should be noted that Asian Americans also work as hard as Protestants. So it's not clear really how important the Protestant ethic per se is, as opposed to anyone who just wants to work hard. I would note that, according to Google AI, Jewish Americans work longer hours than Protestant Americans. Let's next focus on some of his miscellaneous points that he makes before we turn to evaluating his general argument. Number one, he points out, which is true, that acculturation is different from assimilation. Acculturation means getting used to a culture without necessarily liking it or embracing it as your own. So, for example, he gives a quote by a sister of one of the 1993 World Trade Center bombers. "We always considered him a son of America. He was always saying, 'I want to live in America forever.'" This is acculturation, but not assimilation. Similarly, he argues that Dominicans living in New York City today are often acculturated, but not assimilated. Number two, he agrees with Arthur Schlesinger, saying, Schlesinger wrote eloquently about the way Americans have transcended and enriched their English cultural base as it has been reconstituted by transfusions from other continents and civilizations. Absolutely. By letting all cultures compete on an equal playing field, America has allowed the best aspects of each culture to emerge and even dominate. So, for example, Jewish Americans crush every other ethnic group in terms of getting Nobels in many hard sciences. And so while American science is enriched, it also becomes more Jewish, which, Jews being so civilizationally accomplished,
is exactly what America needs. Similarly, as Salins says, immigrant men and women, including blacks and Hispanics, who are parents are far more likely to be married than are natives of the same ethnic groups, and immigrant children are far less likely than those with American parents to be raised in female-headed families or to be born out of wedlock. So again, these immigrants are better Americans in some respects than the Native Americans already here. And so these immigrants raise the bar overall. May the best burrito win. Number 3, he discusses at times American cultural differences with other nations. A, the English tend to be more reserved emotionally and less religious. And B, the French with 1,511 hours per year working, and the Germans with 1,340, compared to Americans with 1,811 hours worked per year. Number 4, having gotten a PhD studying ethnic enclaves, Salins points out how immigrants tend, of course, to come to gateway cities first, like New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Miami, Chicago, Houston, Dallas, and Washington. Not surprisingly, San Francisco's Chinatown, New York's Lower East Side, Chicago's Polonia, and Boston's North End are gateway ethnic enclaves that are more than a century old. These are vital transition points for immigrants when integrating into American society, after which they usually move to the suburbs, becoming more culturally homogenized. Number 5, he makes the point that you can seriously ask whether black Americans have assimilated as much into American culture as other ethnic groups. Merely the fact that blacks are about 5 times more homicidal than whites and others would lead one to wonder, since being a criminal means you're definitely not assimilating. And if this is true, we should ask, why are blacks not assimilated as readily? The answer is because of the welfare state and many other rights violations which have damaged the black family and community, such as the drug war, the pathetic public schools, and minimum wage laws, among others. So having seen the gist of his arguments and how he approaches assimilation, let's see what he gets right and what wrong. I'd give him a B minus overall, given that there is lots of good information and arguments here, but also because he misses a couple of crucial points. Number 1, he gets the language issue essentially right. There's no need I can think of for 2 languages on the national federal level. So English it is. Makes everything simpler. It should be pointed out, incidentally, that right now, for whatever reason, American immigrant children are actually learning English more consistently than previous immigrants did. When, however, Salins points out that the German immigrants in the 19th century wanted their local public schools to teach German, he's faced with 2 choices. A, get rid of the public schools and allow parents to send their children to the school they want without having to pay twice, which they should be able to do. Or B, keep the public institutions, the public schools, and then force all Germans to learn English. Not what we want. And that brings us to his first big mistake. Number 2, public schools. Here he gets it completely, utterly wrong, saying it was especially important that immigrants and natives work together to assimilate the immigrants' children and grandchildren through the public schools. But the stark reality is that public schools actually don't increase assimilation compared to private schools. How do we know this? A, public schools again and again test as more racist and violent than public schools. That makes them, by definition, less assimilative and American. B, tens of millions of Catholics have attended private Catholic and parochial elementary schools throughout almost 200 years of American history. But is there a single shred of evidence to show that these kids turned out to be less assimilated or patriotic than the kids who attended public schools? C, Before World War II, and especially the 60s, elite American colleges were more privately funded and controlled and not woke yet. And thus the private Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, MITs, and others were some of the greatest colleges in the world. Did these colleges assimilate immigrants less than public colleges? If so, why did the graduates of these colleges volunteer for the armed forces in World War II at a higher rate than other Americans? D, what he doesn't understand is that the introduction of public elementary schools during the 19th century drove out the other good private schools that already existed. So when he claims that privately supplied education was a bare-bones approach to elementary education, that's flatly false. This driving out effect has occurred many times in many countries with the introduction of public education. Sam Blumenfeld described this at length, occurring in Boston, in his Is Public Education Necessary?, which I reviewed here. E, the public schools represent intellectual conformity and uniformity by force, which is the exact opposite of what America stands for: intellectual freedom, independence, and individualism. F, Salins laments that society and its cultural elites are now filled with people who are anti-assimilation, saying in the middle of the 20th century, America's elites were persuaded or forced to reject assimilation and to set aside all three of the assimilation contract's provisions. Bilingualism eroded English's monopoly as the only language of school instruction and government. Historical revisionism discredited the American idea as a hypocritical myth. The welfare state superseded the Protestant ethic. Yes, and all those things happened when the public schools, both K-12 and at the college level, had an unprecedented degree of dominance over the whole American educational system, like never before. Those bad ideas would never have been taught to kids if those schools had remained private, because the parents wouldn't have allowed it and paid for it. G, he claims that between 1840 and 1860, spending for American public schools quadruples as the nation's population only doubled. But again, his implication is false. Spending on elementary education throughout the whole 19th century vastly increased simply because parents had more money, and then, as they became wealthier, spent it on their children's education. The introduction of public education was not the reason for the increased spending. H, he says that no European country has ever had a system of public education so uniform and so ability ungraded as that of American schools. Yeah, that's right. To grade kids by age and not ability is stupid, and one of the many reasons that American public education ranks among the worst in the world for developed countries per dollar spent. Finally, number 3, I've left Salins' most important failure for last. In not understanding that America historically assimilated its immigrants so well because it was a free, classically liberal country. So when he asks, why was America's immigration experiment so successful in the past, he shows that he doesn't understand, even as a professor of political philosophy, that freedom inspires people to come to a country. People want to immigrate to a free country and be part of it. And when they arrive, they want to assimilate, and to the degree that they believe in freedom and share that political value, they've already assimilated before they even step onto your shores. This is the essential crux of the matter, and only one time throughout the whole book does he explicitly mention it. Similarly, while he notes that the English cultural influence over America has waned over time, he never understands that the English political wisdom of John Locke and his understanding of property rights, embodied by the framers in the Constitution, was the single greatest factor in creating a country that could productively use, welcome, and assimilate immigrants. This political common understanding, a love of freedom, among new arrivals largely means that all the other cultural differences, like different ethnic foods or habits, become complementary, not destructive or antagonistic, because the most important issue, a respect for property rights, is already agreed on. Hoping that America can again come to understand that if you have a consistently free country with no welfare state, immigration can work out very successfully. I bid you well, and remain the Scarlet Pimpernel.